Labor Talks was John DeRosier, recorded at Chippewa Valley Community Television in Eau Claire, Wisconsin.
This is a return visit for Eau Claire County Board Supervisor John Manydeeds, who, I presume, still represents County Board District 24. John is still on the Administrative Committee. He's also the chair of the Judiciary and Law Enforcement Committee, and he's also on the Chippewa Valley Regional Airport Commission. Now, a few things have changed since John was last on Labor Talks, such as Governor Walker's budget, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. In the meantime, John, welcome back to Labor Talks.
Nice to see you, John.
Good to have you here. Now,
nice to be back.
Let's see, we'll just go over some old information here. How long have you served on the county board, and what changes have occurred since you were last on Labor Talks, which was about 3-4 months ago?
Yeah, you know, it's been about 6 years, a little bit more than that, I think, as far as serving on the county board. Changes on the county board, obviously Act 10 had a big effect on us. The way it has affected us has been that prior to Act 10, everybody was represented by a union. And the board would negotiate through our county administrator and corporation council with the various unions, and we would have the contracts and we'd approve those unions. The idea being that the contracts that were hammered out by the parties were fair, that they represented, I guess, what would be considered fair market value for the services being offered by the workers. And there was, I think, a lot of give and take. Now, when Act 10 came into being, all the unions except for the patrol deputies disappeared. You know, they're there, but not nearly the way they were. And it created a unique problem in that, for example, and I'm going to use the jail because the jail is the most obvious example of this, is that the jail salaries were no longer being negotiated via a union. Jail salaries and working conditions have always been a topic of discussion. We have had traditionally a large turnover of workers in the jail, the corrections officers. Now, when you have a single worker leave, it's not like a lot of other places where you can simply go out on the street or go to the university and hire somebody that would be able to fill that position. The difference is that when an officer is interviewed or a potential worker is interviewed, there are tests that have to be given to the person, psychological, aptitude, all sorts of things of that sort. They cost money. They have to be outfitted with uniforms. They have to receive certain certifications in order to work in a jail. Then at some point in time, assuming that they go all the way through that and we've hired them, they cannot be out on their own in the jail by themselves. They have to be tutored by somebody for an extended period of time. One of the officers about a year and a half ago estimated that it would cost about $50,000 from the start of the procedure to the end of the procedure to replace someone. That would include, in addition to all the stuff I just said, the time from when the previous officer left. That officer's time would have to be filled in via overtime with officers that were on staff. And all the time until the officer was able to go by themselves would be overtime. So you're amassing a large amount of overtime, and you're amassing a large debt with each worker. Now, what has happened in the meantime is we started as a county board, became concerned about the fairness of how people were being paid. There is a cost to the county when we lose a worker in addition to that $50,000, like for the deputies. Other departments have special skills that are required as well. So when we lose a worker, we're losing experience, we're losing the ability to get things done quickly, and more importantly, we're losing the ability to provide services to our neighbors, cousins, relatives, in an efficient manner. Wages and work conditions are important as far as that's concerned. So when we started looking at the cost to individuals, Human Resources, I believe it was, acted and received permission to receive bids for what they called a compensation study. A compensation study was, we hired one person initially, or one organization initially. That didn't work out. We received a different organization to do it, and that organization did a good job. What was found was that working conditions in the county, they're okay, they're not the best, but in order to retain good workers, the person who did the study, Dr. McGrath, said that years ago, when a person went to work for any governmental organization, it was understood that their salary was going to be not as good as that in the private sector, but that the benefits would make up for it, the benefits being health insurance, retirement, things of that sort. With time, the benefits have decreased, and with time, the salaries have not kept up with other comparable people in private sectors. As a result, we in Eau Claire County have been losing people on a regular basis to not just the private sector in some places, but to other counties. We had almost a pipeline of corrections officers that were heading toward Chippewa County or Dunn County or other places in the area. We would have all that money invested in the worker. They would get some experience and then start looking for greener grass. And they would find it in these other counties because the job is basically the same. The pay was better. And so they would leave because of the pay. Dr. McGrath came up with a scale that we passed at our last county board meeting. And the salary, I think, is a good salary. I think that our corrections officers overall were very happy with it. I think a lot of the county workers overall were very happy with it. I think the big problem tends to be, like anything, it's not perfect. We're people, we're not God. We make mistakes, and there are things in this compensation package that are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And the biggest being that if you had years of experience, the wage adjustment that was going on may bump you into a higher salary, but the other people with you may all be in the same spot. So you had these situations where you could have a person who has just started earning as much as a person who had been there 10, 12 years, and that was just not right. So we did make some steps to try to even that out. With time, I think it'll work out okay, but I think that's the biggest problem, is that no longer are we able to negotiate with a union to try to work out a reasonable resolution. We are now stuck in a spot where we have to try to keep ahead of the game and maintain the quality of our workers by offering them a reasonable and competitive salary structure.
Now, obviously, you've seen a reduction in county employees, especially in law enforcement, especially regarding jailers, correct?
Well, there's yes and no. As far as the jailers were concerned, when we built the new jail, when the new positions came on, we started looking at things concerning staffing. And staffing is not that complicated. If you take a single post, a person standing and doing what they're supposed to do, which is watching guard, watching over the people in the various units, in order to run that person 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for an entire year, I think the figure was 5.4 employees were required. As a county board, we understaffed the jail right off the bat for a lot of reasons. We didn't have the money for it, obviously. So what we did, instead of going to the 5.4, we just did 5. The net effect of that has been that we require people to come in and perform overtime to make up that 0.4 of a position. which translates into roughly somewhere around 500 hours a year per post.
So you have employees coming in a bit more than
Actually,
usual.
that's wrong. It's close to 1,000 hours per year, per post.
Okay. Does that make the job a bit more dangerous, especially in the jail or perhaps out on patrol?
Yes, I think it does. I think when you have a person who is having to work overtime, when a person is putting in multiple hours, multiple shifts, there's a certain level of fatigue that sets in. There is a certain level of maybe not intentional, but just because they're getting tired, a little bit sloppiness. And I think that makes it more dangerous in a lot of ways. It'd be nice to be able to have the jail fully staffed at 5.4 units or persons per post. That's not going to happen because we don't have the money. It would be nice to fully outfit the sheriff's department. I know that the sheriff had been asked by the previous administrator to come up with a list of the number of workers that he feels would be necessary to outfit his department in order to fit the demands of Eau Claire County. And my memory is that it was going to require him to have to be able to, at some point, hire an additional 20 more workers, which is not going to happen.
Now, staying with this, with the aspect of the job becoming more dangerous, have you had any specific incidents that you could recall?
There seem to be a lot more incidents involving weapons. I know that the sheriff's department had that there was a high-profile situation where a man kidnapped a woman from the southeast part of the state, ended up in the town of Seymour, and there was a very intense search for him out in that part of the county, in the town of Seymour. I know that we had received assistance from various other law enforcement agencies. I know that the armored personnel carriers, I think they're called Bearcats, they're not the big ones because we don't have that at this point, but the smaller armored personnel carriers, I think they were using all of them, which is 2 for Eau Claire County. But I think that, if I remember what the sheriff had said, I think there were somewhere around 5 or 6 of them that were being used by the various other law enforcements in the area. The nice thing about what had happened there from Eau Claire County's point of view is that our neighbors in these other counties didn't charge us for the time that these other officers were in Eau Claire County. But it's dangerous. There was a worry that this man who was armed, and everybody knew he was armed, might take it out on law enforcement officers. There was a helicopter that had been rented to fly over the woods to locate him, and there had been a gunshot that they believed they had heard, so they quit doing that level of reconnaissance in the air. And I think what really had happened is I think the young man had killed himself at that point. But they had to continue looking. They didn't know, and they couldn't assume. Humorous point about that whole thing, if there was one, because it's all a huge tragedy, is that apparently when everything was said and done and they found that this young man had committed suicide, it's not really humorous, but that's tragic. I mean, that part is really sad. But there had been a bear that had been bothering that part of the county, and the bear at that moment decided to make its appearance. And so they trapped it, they live trapped it, and they brought it somewhere else. But of all the weird things to happen, you're looking for a person who is armed, and all of a sudden it's all done. You go, I'm assuming they started relaxing, and this bear pops out. Now, the rest of the story is right after that, there was yet another young man who did something similar and ended up near Fall Creek. And so they had another search immediately after that other one had just ended. In fact, I believe I was at the Sheriff's Department firing range in Fall Creek, and they had already started mobilizing for this other search. So I think that makes it more dangerous in a lot of ways. One of the deputies had told me that studies show that when counties start hitting the size that Eau Claire is, which is about 100,000 plus, that these types of incidents start becoming more and more prevalent. And I think that's what makes it more dangerous.
Now, with this comp study that was just done, will the county employees be seeing an increase in their wages or benefits at all?
The benefits is, I don't think their benefits are ever going to get better. I'm sorry about that, but there's only so much we can afford, and at some point we have to be good stewards of what our brothers and sisters and neighbors require us to do. So the benefits aren't going to get better. The wages have to get a little bit better. I believe that the way the comp study is set up is that, let's assume that you're in a certain spot on the scale. There's, I believe, 24 or 25 spots on the scale lettered A through, I want to say Y, but I'm not sure on that. And in each one of those, there is, I want to say, 15 different spots. So it's a pay scale. So if you are hired as a corrections officer, you're at level L, let's say, you're going to be at level 1. And then the next year you're going to be at 2, which is going to be an increase all the way out until you're 15. Now, I believe that the salaries between 1, 2, and I want to say 3 or 4, I can't remember the specifics, so don't hold me on it, but I believe that those are the equivalent of a 2% raise, and then I think it's a 1.5%, and then it tapers off to a 1% raise per year after that.
Okay. Now, we know that state revenues to the county have been reduced. This has affected all of the counties. And how has that affected the overall budget for Eau Claire County, as well as the Sheriff's Department and the wages for those working within the Sheriff's Department? And I know you just alluded to it, but if you could be just a bit more specific.
Well, I think that we used to receive a lot more money for other programming. The courts used to receive a lot more money, for example. And it's sort of a complicated thing, but I'm going to try to give it a shot. So when a person is caught speeding, let's say, and now let's not make it speeding, let's make it a criminal act, doesn't matter, a criminal retail theft. When the person goes into court and assuming they are found guilty or they plead guilty to it, they have to pay an assortment of costs. Court costs on a misdemeanor by themselves, $443, and in a property offense it's $453. The idea would be that amongst most people is that that money stays here, which is not the case. Most of that heads back to Madison. We hardly see any of that. And what ends up happening is that, and I'm not sure if it's a formula, it certainly seems like it when I see it, but the state will return a certain portion of that money that we collect back to the counties. Now that's been getting lesser and lesser.
Mm-hmm.
And there's two reasons for that. One is that the diversion programs in Eau Claire County have been very good, and they're keeping people from being convicted criminally. And the negative impact for the community is that they're not having to pay fines. They're doing other things to make sure they don't get into trouble again, which I think overall is better for everybody. Because then you don't have some little 18-year-old kid having to explain when he's 30 and looking for a different job why they picked up a retail theft when they were 18. Excuse me. Now we're doing different things. So that takes some of the money out of the process. And that hurts how many people can be maintained in the clerk of courts, for example. That has a direct effect on that. We're in a budgetary process right now. The sheriff's budget came through. Every year, as you know, you've been on that committee before, the sheriff's budget tends to be, he tends to ask for more than what he spent the previous year, and it's all salaries. He has a big staff. I want to say he has about 115 people working for him, if I remember right, plus or minus a few. And if you give everybody a 1% raise or whatever, he doesn't have it. He's got to go back to the county for money. So money not coming into the county from other sources means we have to find different places to remedy that. Fortunately, in our county, we've been booming lately, and we've been getting very good revenues from sales taxes, and we had another unexpected benefit in that timber sales from the county has been very good this year. We're going to make some reasonable money out of that, and will help pay for a lot of what's going on in the county that we normally wouldn't have otherwise.
Now, I'm going to try to exercise some common sense, so I might get into trouble here.
Okay.
This happened before. We've seen decrease in state revenues. If we see an increase in state revenues with the right people elected, would that have a positive effect on wages?
That's a good question. I don't know if I know that answer. I don't think that the wage issue is simply money coming in from the state, because it's always out of the same person's pockets ultimately anyway. It's you and me. I think the thing that limits our ability to pay wages and to do other things tends to be something called local control. We don't have it. Our county, we on the county board and other bodies like the county board, the school board, city council, all these other groups that are in the community are limited by law that we can only increase our budget by the greater of either 1%, or if new growth, new building in the county is bigger than that, then we can add a little bit more. Now, Eau Claire has been busy, and we've been able to have more money than that, but we don't have local control. We can't do a lot of the things we'd like to do. On top of that, we have all these unfunded mandates that get tossed onto us that we have to pay for. The most recent one being that whenever a person is charged with misdemeanors and some additional felonies, that we in the county have to collect DNA. It costs us money. We have to have people that are staffed to do it. We have to have the materials, and we have to have the time. And currently, I think what we do is we are paying for 5 reserve deputies to come in at different times to help collect this material. And I believe it's Monday through Thursday or Monday through Friday, but we have a room that's specially set up just for it in the building. And that's money. That's money we don't get back. And I think last year, I want to say it cost us around $60,000 for that, but I'm not sure. That may not be a correct number, but I know it cost us a good amount of money. But that's a good example of all these unfunded mandates that are out there. It's like like I was alluding to earlier with the county clerk of courts having to collect fines and other things and send it down to the state. We have to do that. It really doesn't benefit us. We are really just a tax collector or a bill collector for the state, I guess would be a better description. And we receive a small portion of that back.
Now, speaking of saving tax dollars, I assume that you support the specialized courts, such as the Veterans Treatment Court, the Drug Court, the Single Mothers Court. Do those courts save money for the taxpayers? It's my understanding that they do.
They do. It's an interesting idea. The specialty courts, the drug courts, things like that, they use something that we call evidence-based decision-making. In the legal system, this is really exciting because this is the law evolving right in front of you. Evidence-based decision-making is how courts and how the legal system is looking at dealing with people. A good example of this would be not that long ago, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, it used to be common, and it's still common by a lot of older people that work in the system. Oh, little Billy got picked up for possession of pot. Teach him a lesson, send him in jail for a night, no big deal. Well, it turns out that that's the worst thing you could do with little Billy, because what little Billy does when little Billy goes into jail is you may have a person that was an occasional recreational marijuana user but is hanging out with still pretty good kids and pretty good people, they go into the jail for even one night or two nights, and they end up meeting very bad people who take care of them. So now you've got somebody coming up to little Billy saying, you're going to be okay, we'll take care of you, and all of a sudden they're friends outside the jail, and little Billy's getting into more trouble. The treatment courts are wonderful in that one of the things that they look at is no longer necessarily the idea that you have a chemical dependency problem. That's an issue, but it's not the biggest issue. The biggest issue the courts have been finding in evidence-based decision-making has been who they're hanging out with. So does it save money? Yes, I think it does, because what ends up happening is you're having people that are in the treatment courts that are literally in the last step before them heading off to prison. Not everybody's successful. I think a good number are. Prison is an expensive thing. If we can get people turned around so they're not getting into trouble, and they're being good, and they're providing money for their loved ones and taking care of their children, I think it saves everybody money, and it gives the community a good worker back. So I think that they're a very good thing to have.
Now, we have 1 minute left.
Okay.
I understand you're running for circuit court judge. Is that correct? And
Yes.
if so, why?
Well, there's two things. First off, I'm going to no longer be on the board after this term because I'm going to run for judge. I was talking about the treatment courts and watching the law evolve. Watching the law evolve is exciting, and I think any professional that is in a spot where we're able to see the law change, you've got to take that opportunity to be involved. I've been on the Judiciary and Law Enforcement Committee for a while. It's like watching a sports car pull up. You want to get in, you want to drive it. I think that I could be a very good judge in Eau Claire County, and I think that I am trained in the ways of looking at evidence-based decision-making, and I think I could do a great job.
That's our program. My thanks to the viewing audience. My thanks to John Manydeeds. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you, John.
And remember, please contact your respective legislators. Ask them to draw some legislation that will provide some badly needed revenue for community television. Thank you very much.